Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something pretty big, I think, something you've been wanting to understand better,
Yeah.
and quickly. So we're going to try to extract some of the most important nuggets from James Grother's book, The Burnout Breakthrough. All right, so no feeling overwhelmed, just getting right to the core of what burnout is and how to deal with it and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is a widespread experience, and Grother offers, I think a really practical perspective that we can dive into. So I'm excited to explore this together.
And if you've been feeling that kind of exhaustion that just doesn't lift,
Yeah.
even after a good night's sleep, or that cynicism, that kind of negativity that's just kind of lingering, and you're not sure where it's coming from, or you're just feeling doubtful, about your abilities, you are in good company. Definitely not alone. Burnout is a big part of our modern experience, would you say?
It really is. It's something that so many people are grappling with these days. And our aim today is to go beyond just sort of a casual understanding of what burnout is. We hear the term thrown around a lot, but what does it really mean? So we want to really explore, what fuels it, help you recognize the signs, understand its impact, and most importantly, offer some pathways to recovery and prevention, some tools to work with.
And to kind of unpack all of that, to provide some deeper context to James Grother's work, of our expert here. So let's just start with that term that we hear all the time, burnout. What is it? I mean, beyond just feeling like really, really tired, what is it, really?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start because, we do use it very casually,
Right.
Oh, I'm so burned out. But Grother emphasizes that the actual condition is much more profound.
Right.
It's a deeper experience. And the term was actually coined back in the 1970s by psychologist Herbert Freudenberger. And he initially observed it in people who were working in helping professions. So, nurses, social workers, people who are in those, really demanding roles. And Freudenberger defined burnout as the extinction of motivation or incentive, where, one's devotion fails to produce the desired results.
Right.
So it's that sense of giving putting a lot of energies in and not seeing the kind of impact that you were hoping for.
Oh, so it's not just the hours that you're working. That's not the only thing.
Right, exactly. There's a qualitative difference there. It's about that sense of depletion and lack of impact. And our understanding of burnout really solidified, I think, with the work of Christina Maslach, who really laid out a framework that's now the most widely accepted one. And she describes burnout as a syndrome that's characterized by three interconnected dimensions. So kind of three key elements that are kind of intertwined. And the first of these is overwhelming exhaustion. And again, this isn't just the tiredness you feel after a busy day. This is a much deeper, pervasive depletion. It's emotional, it's physical, it's cognitive, where sleep and weekends, those things that normally recharge you just don't seem to cut it anymore. And you might even start to notice, physical symptoms popping up, things like persistent fatigue, aches and pains that don't have a clear cause, even a weakened immune system. Emotionally, you just feel constantly overwhelmed, like you're at the end of your rope. Unable to cope with everyday demands.
Yeah. Just that feeling of being completely drained. It's not just tired, it's drained.
Drained, yeah, exactly. And then the second dimension is cynicism and detachment, which is sometimes also called depersonalization.
Right.
And this involves, kind of an emotional distancing from your work, from your colleagues, from the people around you, and you might find yourself becoming more negative, irritable, cynical, not just about specific tasks, but about your job in general, about your colleagues, about your clients, even about things outside of work. And there's a loss of that initial enthusiasm and idealism, the thing that maybe brought you to this work in the first place, and you kind of develop this more indifferent, even callous attitude as a way to kind of protect yourself.
Right.
So things that once felt meaningful just start to feel like a burden.
Yeah, like you're putting up a wall between yourself and the things that used to matter.
Yeah, exactly. It's a way of kind of shielding yourself emotionally. And then the third dimension is reduced professional efficacy. And this is that feeling of lack of accomplishment. So, despite putting in the effort, there's this persistent sense that you're not achieving anything worthwhile. that feeling of incompetence, that can be really demoralizing. And you might see, a decline in your productivity. You might find yourself making more mistakes than usual, and just start to doubt your skills and abilities, which can lead to, a lot of frustration, a sense of hopelessness about your professional life. And, it's not just about your actual output, but often it's a deeply felt sense of ineffectiveness. Like no matter what you do, it's just not good enough.
It's that combination, right? It's that feeling utterly exhausted, becoming cynical, and feeling like you're just not getting anywhere no matter how much effort you put in. Yeah. But, reading through Grother's book, it's all or nothing, is it? Like you can have varying degrees of these things.
Absolutely. It's not like you wake up one morning and you're suddenly burned out. It's a process. It's a spectrum. And you might find that you experience one or two of these dimensions, more strongly than others. You might be feeling incredibly exhausted, but not necessarily cynical or vice versa. And it's important to note, the World Health Organization, the WHO, they actually officially recognize burnout in their International Classification of Diseases. So it's an actual, recognized condition, and they classify it as an occupational phenomenon, which means it's a syndrome that results from, chronic workplace stress that hasn't been successfully managed, and they define it using these same three dimensions that we've just discussed. So it really is this combination of exhaustion, cynicism, and reduced efficacy. And while the WHO is focusing on the workplace, it's clear that stress in other areas of your life can certainly contribute to these feelings as well.
Right.
It's not always just about work.
Yeah, it's like life in general. And we hear the terms stress and burnout used like interchangeably a lot. But Grother really makes a distinction between the two, which I thought was really, really important. What are some of the key differences that we need to understand?
Yeah, it's a really crucial distinction because as Grother emphasizes, how you address stress versus how you address burnout is very different. And if you try to approach burnout with the same kind of, push through it mentality that you might use for stress, it can actually make things worse.
Mm.
Right. So thinking about stress, right? Stress often involves a state of over engagement.
Right.
When you're stressed, you might feel that sense of urgency, even hyperactivity, and often a lot of anxiety.
Right.
Kind of that feeling of everything's happening at once. And even though the demands feel overwhelming, there's often that belief, even if it's kind of a frantic belief, that if you just push harder, you can get through it. You can conquer this. You can manage this. Your emotions tend to be more heightened, more amplified. So you might feel, more agitated, more worried. The energy associated with stress can feel very almost frantic, right? Like you're wired. And your motivation, while it might be strained, often persists. You still want to tackle the problem. The primary impact of stress can be physical, right? Headaches, muscle tension, and you definitely feel energy depletion.
Right.
You're just tired. The core feeling of stress is often like you're drowning in responsibilities. It's like you're just overwhelmed by everything that's coming at you. But with stress, there's usually still a hope that things will eventually improve.
Right.
That if you just kind of get through this period, things will get better.
So that feeling of I'm overwhelmed, but I know it's going to get better at some point.
Right, exactly. Whereas with burnout, it's a very different experience. So burnout is characterized by disengagement.
Yeah.
So instead of that kind of feeling of frantic energy, there's this profound sense of emptiness and depletion, right? Like you've just run out of gas. Your motivation is significantly decreased, if not completely gone. You just don't care anymore. Your emotions become kind of blunted,
Right.
which leads to that feeling of detachment, of cynicism, even hopelessness that we talked about earlier. The energy feels completely drained, exhausted, right? You have nothing left to give.
Right.
The primary impact of burnout is more emotional and motivational. And it can really erode, your beliefs about yourself and your capabilities.
Right.
Like, you start to question, can I even do this anymore? And instead of feeling like you're drowning, the core feeling of burnout is often one of being empty and dried up.
Right.
Like you've just been squeezed out, like there's nothing left. And then the key difference in your outlook is that with burnout, there's often a loss of hope. That idealism that you might have had, it starts to fade and you feel like your work no longer has meaning.
Oh, wow. So with stress, there's still hope. But with burnout, that's gone. That's a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the key things to really pay attention to. And, if you are feeling that way, that's a sign that you really need to step back and make some changes.
So if you're listening and you're feeling like, oh, wait, this isn't just stress, this is something different, that's a big signal to take note of. It seems like we hear about burnout so much more now. Is it really on the rise, or is it just that we're talking about it more?
Well, I think there's truth to both of those things. I mean, we are definitely more aware of burnout now, but Grother also points out that there are some specific factors that are contributing to this increase. One of the biggest ones, is this always-on culture that we live in now. Technology, while it has its benefits, has also blurred those lines between our work and our personal lives. We're constantly connected to email, to notifications, to all these different communication channels. And it creates this pressure to be available and responsive all the time. It's like you're never really off the clock, which makes it really difficult to truly disconnect and recharge.
I feel that. It's like everyone expects you to be available 24/7.
Oh, exactly. And then, on top of that, we've got increasing economic uncertainty. The nature of work is changing. The rise of the gig economy, while it offers flexibility for some, it also often comes with, job insecurity, lack of benefits, lack of traditional support structures, stagnant wages in many sectors coupled with rising living costs. All of that creates a lot of financial stress and occupational stress for people. And then we're also just bombarded with information all the time, like this constant stream of news, social media updates, all this digital noise. And that can be really taxing on our cognitive resources, and it can contribute to those feelings of overwhelm and inadequacy, like I'm not doing enough, I'm not keeping up.
Yeah, and the pressure that some people feel, the hustle culture. You always have to be doing something, always have to be productive, always have to be grinding.
Absolutely, this glorification of relentless productivity and long work hours, it creates this pressure to always be doing more, and often at the expense of our well-being and our downtime. And then, we layer on top of that, the impact of global events, things like the pandemic, increasing concerns about climate change, social and political unrest, all of those things add layers of stress and uncertainty to our lives, and it all contributes to this burnout landscape that we're living in.
It's no wonder so many of us are struggling, with these feelings. So I think it's really important to remember that burnout, it's not a personal failing. It's not a sign of weakness. It's really complex syndrome that's influenced by the environment we're living and working in. And just understanding that, I think, is a big first step, wouldn't you say?
It really is. It's about recognizing that this is a systemic issue, and that you're not alone in this experience. And as Brother points out, recognizing that can really point toward the need for broader changes, not just individual changes, but also, potential changes within our workplaces and our societal structures, so it's a bigger conversation.
Yeah. So burnout is not just being super stressed. It's its own thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's got that triad of exhaustion, cynicism, and that feeling of not being effective at what you do. And it's all wrapped up in the pressures of modern life. As we're coming to a close here, what are some of the most important things that you'd want people to remember, if they're feeling this way? What are the big takeaways?
Yeah, I think the core message, that Grother really drives home is that burnout is not just being really stressed. It's this distinct condition that's marked by that combination of overwhelming exhaustion, that growing sense of cynicism and detachment, and that persistent feeling of reduced efficacy. Like you're just not good at what you do anymore. And as we talked about, it's influenced by this whole range of modern pressures, from our constant connectivity to those economic anxieties and those societal expectations that we've discussed.
And it's not a temporary thing either. It's not just like, I pulled an all-nighter or had a rough week. It's something deeper than that.
Exactly. It's a chronic state, and addressing it effectively really requires understanding, where it's coming from.
Right.
Understanding those root causes. And Grother, he emphasizes that those roots extend across different areas. So, there are factors within the workplace itself, things like your workload, the level of control that you have, the recognition and rewards that you receive, the sense of community and fairness, alignment with your values, all of those things. But there are also, individual factors, your personality traits, your lifestyle choices, and then those broader societal pressures that we talked about.
So it's not just your job, it's everything. It's kind of like a perfect storm of things that all come together to create this burnout.
Right, exactly. And so, if you are feeling those signs of burnout, one of the first things you can do is really just start to pay attention to what your body and your mind are telling you.
All right.
Are you experiencing persistent fatigue that doesn't go away with rest? Are you having trouble sleeping? Have you noticed an increase in your irritability? Are you losing motivation for things that you used to enjoy? Are you withdrawing socially? Have you seen, a decline in your performance at work? All of those things can be warning signs.
So being self-aware.
Right.
So paying attention to what's going on inside.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And those early signals are so important because ignoring them, it can have pretty significant consequences for your well-being.
Right.
It's not something that you want to just brush under the rug.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of people try to do that. They think, oh, I'll just push through it. It'll be fun. But burnout, it doesn't really work that way. It kind of digs its claws in deeper.
It does. And the impact of burnout, it can extend, far beyond just, your work life. It can affect your physical health. It can strain your relationships. It can just diminish your overall quality of life. It can increase your risk for a lot of different health problems. And really just erode your sense of joy and fulfillment in life. So taking those proactive steps is really, really crucial. If you're recognizing some of these signs in yourself, what can you do? What's a helpful first step?
Yeah. I mean, it can feel overwhelming, right? Like, where do you even begin to deal with something like this?
Yeah, it can. But the first step, and Growther really emphasizes this, is to acknowledge what you're experiencing.
Right.
And to acknowledge it with self-compassion, to recognize that this is not a personal failing. This is not a sign of weakness. And to be kind and understanding towards yourself.
Right.
You're going through something difficult. And then it's really important to reach out for support, talk to trusted friends, family members, consider seeking professional guidance from a therapist or a counselor. You don't have to go through this alone. There are people who care about you, who want to help.
It can be hard to reach out, but it's so important.
It is. And then, for those moments when you're feeling acutely overwhelmed, like in this moment, I need some relief, right? Growther talks about some helpful techniques that he calls burnout first aid. And these are, simple things, but they can be really effective. Things like consciously taking short breaks throughout the day, practicing some intentional breathing exercises, just taking a few minutes to really slow down your breath and kind of calm your nervous system, grounding yourself in the present moment by focusing on your senses. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you feel? Ruthlessly prioritizing your tasks and letting go of what's not important, really focusing on what needs to get done and letting go of the rest. Making sure that you're staying hydrated, drinking enough water, eating nourishing food, and engaging in some gentle physical movement, going for a walk, doing some stretching, anything that kind of helps you to move your body and release some of that tension. All of those things can offer some immediate relief, even if it's just temporary.
Yeah. It's like putting a Band-Aid on it.
Right.
Like, it's not going to fix the problem, but it can help to stop the bleeding for a little bit.
Exactly. But then, beyond those immediate actions, what are some of the more fundamental things, the more longer term strategies that are essential for both recovery and prevention?
Yeah. Because we don't want to just be putting Band-Aids on this all the time. We want to actually get to the root of the problem.
Exactly. And for lasting recovery, to build resilience against burnout in the future, Growther emphasizes the importance of making some foundational lifestyle shifts. And this includes, prioritizing consistent quality sleep,
Right.
making sure that you're getting enough sleep, that you're sleeping well, nourishing your body with healthy and balanced food, really paying attention to what you're putting into your body and making sure that you're getting the nutrients that you need. Incorporating regular physical activity into your routine. Again, that doesn't have to be anything strenuous. It can be something as simple as going for a walk or doing some yoga. But just moving your body regularly is so important for both your physical and your mental health. And then, intentionally scheduling dedicated time for relaxation and activities that you enjoy.
Okay.
Making sure that you're taking time for yourself to do things that bring you joy and that help you to de-stress.
So it's all those basic things that we know we should be doing, but we don't always do.
Yeah.
Eating well, sleeping enough, exercising, taking time for ourselves.
Right. Exactly. And then, learning and implementing the vital skill of setting and maintaining healthy boundaries, both at work and in your personal life. This is about protecting your time and your energy, saying no to things that drain you, setting limits on how much you're willing to give. And then finally, cultivating a positive and resilient mindset, learning to challenge those negative thought patterns that can contribute to burnout, practicing gratitude, focusing on the things in your life that you're grateful for, and focusing on the aspects of your life that you can actually control. Because there's a lot that we can't control.
Right.
But there are things that we can, and focusing on those things can help us to feel more empowered and more in control of our lives.
It's like taking ownership of your own well-being, right? Instead of letting life just happen to you, you're making conscious choices to take care of yourself.
Exactly. And the journey of building what Grother calls a burnout-proof future. It's an ongoing process,
right?
It's a journey of self-awareness and making those intentional choices about how you live and how you work. And it's about moving beyond just trying to survive, to actually thriving, to cultivating that sustained vitality and well-being.
That's a great way to put it. So, this deep dive into the burnout breakthrough, it really does provide like a roadmap. But as you said, the real breakthrough, it starts with each of us, with our commitment to understanding this and really making a conscious choice to prioritize our own well-being. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise on this. It's really been, I think, incredibly valuable.
My pleasure. It's a conversation that I think is so important for us all to be having. We need to be talking about this more. And I think the more we talk about it, the more we can start to make those changes, both individually and collectively, so that we can all create a more sustainable and fulfilling way of life.
All right. So for those of you listening, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
See you next time.